I'm Dave Cawley, host of the Cold Podcast. If you've listened to Cold, you know my approach to investigating cases involves an intense attention to detail. The little things matter, and when placed together in context, they allow us to see the big picture. Not long ago, I had the opportunity to talk cold cases on another podcast, Real Crime Profile. The award-winning true crime podcast features co-hosts Jim Clemente and Laura Richards. Jim is a former FBI supervisory agent and profiler and former New York City prosecutor. Laura is a former New Scotland Yard criminal behavioral analyst, as well as a world-leading expert on coercive control and domestic violence, topics familiar to anyone who's listened to the Susan Powell story in Cold Season 1. Oh, and Laura is also founder of Paladin National Stalking Advocacy Service, which is all to say they're professionals who share my focus on the details. They're true criminal profilers who know how to deconstruct the psychology behind the kinds of stories shared here in Cold. And of utmost importance to me, they advocate for and maintain focus on the experience of victims. Our conversation on Real Crime Profile centered on the Sheree Warren case, but we also went so much farther. Jim, Laura, and Real Crime Profile's third co-host, Lisa Zambetti, analyzed all three of the cases covered so far in Cold. I genuinely appreciated hearing from Jim, Laura, and Lisa, who, I should mention, works as casting director for CBS's Criminal Minds. They invested a lot of time doing what you've done, listening to the stories of Susan Powell, Joyce Yost, and Sheree Warren. Laura and Jim then applied their combined 60-plus years of investigative experience to the cases. I think you'll be interested in what they have to say. I'm about to play a clip from Real Crime Profile episode 422. It's one of the 2 episodes I guested on. While you're listening, please do me the favor of following Real Crime Profile on Amazon Music or wherever you get your podcasts. Download the Amazon Music app today.
Yes, and I mean, often with these cases, people think about what violence looks like and they think about physical signs of abuse. Were there broken bones? Were there bruises? When they think about, Susan Powell and the life that she was living, and you see all these lovely smiley photos of the family. But what we don't know from a photo is what level of control might be going on. Not just even behind closed doors, actually. Often coercive control is in every aspect of people's life. It's just that people don't see it as controlling behavior. And the children are affected too. We often don't think about children who are in homes where there's a coercive controller, or that coercive controllers can be very charming and very plausible, and they can be manipulative. So these are sort of, when I was listening to Susan Powell's case and really thinking about, well, what's truly going on in the family dynamics, often those signs get missed. But I can say 100% that a father, if they're a good father, they do not kill their children on any form of contact. And oftentimes we heard it with the hate case, and you're in Utah. We heard exactly the same of what happened in that case with Tasha Haight, that a eulogy was written about a good father who had shot his 5 children and his wife, who had filed for divorce, and her mother, who was there to offer support and protection. But too often, Dave, I hear, well, he was still a good father. And well, he may have done something to the mother, but he's still a good father. The question for me is about coercive control of the dynamics that were happening, but also why was he given any form of contact with the children when he was under investigation? And sometimes in these cases, people just see that they're still a good enough father. Well, how can that be?
Yeah, right. Because as you say, Laura, doing something bad to the mother is being a bad father. In other words, this is their mother. This is the children's mother. So hurting her in some way obviously means that he's not a good father. But anyway, that is a very cautionary tale. It's a horrible case, but not the only one you talk about in your series, Cold.
No. So we came out of season 1 of Cold looking at the Susan Powell case. And as you say, all of those elements of coercive control. Josh Powell, the husband in that case, he knew how to toe the line and not leave bruises. But he was doing all the kinds of things you talk about on your show, right? He was controlling the finances. He was limiting Susan's access to friends and family. Very kind of classic narcissistic, abusive traits, even though they don't rise to the level of physical abuse until Susan disappears and is presumably murdered. When we shifted focus for our second season, it was quite a lot different. We looked at a case of Joyce Yost. Joyce Yost, in a nutshell, she was followed home by a man she had never met. As she pulled into her carport outside her apartment, he confronted her and stuck his knee in the door of her car and told her he wanted to take her for a drink. Joyce was very clearly uncomfortable with this, told the man she didn't want to spend time with him, but tried to put him off politely, recognizing this was a dangerous situation. That man forced himself on her there. He ended up actually abducting Joyce, holding her for several hours, sexually assaulting her, threatening her that if she told anybody what happened, that he would come back and kill her. Joyce, against her better judgment, after she managed to convince this man to release her, did report the assault to law enforcement. She went to court. She testified at a preliminary hearing, but then 10 days before she was to testify at trial, she disappeared. The man who assaulted her came back and very grimly plotted to try to have hitmen kill Joyce. And then when that fell through, he ended up taking her life himself. And that man, Doug Lovell, is today on death row in the state of Utah, but has continually basically fought to avoid A, telling where Joyce's remains are and giving that closure to her family, and B, trying to forestall his execution.
And Joyce's story really has a big impact in season 3 that we're going to get to. But that thing about a woman coming forward and having the guts and the bravery to tell law enforcement what happened to her, and then for her to be murdered for it, had just a cascading effect on so many other women in this area. It's just horrible.
Yeah, I agree. For a woman to come forward and for the justice system to leave her hanging like that, whether it's a domestic violence situation in the home or whether it comes from outside, to not appreciate the danger that that woman is in, to not protect her, the justice system has failed completely in this case.
And I totally agree with you. I think what we see when we go back and look at the record about how Doug Lovell, the man that killed Joyce Yost, was repeatedly allowed to slip out of custody, slip out of jail. In one instance, he was actually caught driving DUI with a loaded firearm in the vehicle. He's a felon. He's not allowed to possess a gun, let alone be driving drunk. And he's booked into jail and then kicked out the next morning back onto the street. High danger level. And then at the same time, we see Joyce, who has been subjected to this violent act, and she's just trying to put her life back together, to move on, to not let this define her. So when she has people who are telling her, hey, why don't you come stay with us for a little while? Why don't you, take some time off work? That's not where she wants to be. And so it's this balancing act that she may not even realize the danger that she's in because she's going through a trauma response, right? And the failure of the criminal justice system to recognize the dangerousness of that situation and protect her is a major theme of Cold Season 2.
And the dangerousness of him.
Yes.
I track these serial, dangerous, violent men and have done across my 27 years. And just what you described, Dave, this constant slap on the wrist and being enabled and green lit. The message to him is carry on. The message to her is you have to change your whole life. You're the one that has to, move or disappear yourself. What about him? Why wasn't anyone looking in terms of proactive problem solving for him? And too often we think about the victim and what she should do. But what I always ask law enforcement to do is to think about the perpetrator and their history. And most of them have these protracted histories. And the messaging is all wrong. It really is. And I think, as you describe it, the fact that he appeared and he put his knee in the door and he's pushing the boundary, women have these experiences every day. I'm not saying somebody putting the foot in the door, but being followed, or being given a look, or made to feel unsafe. And I have to say, the last couple of weeks, I've just dealt with so many horrific cases. And it really is getting to a point where male violence is soaring. And women are only as safe as their male partner allows them to be, or the men on the street allow them to be. And I think people forget this because oftentimes we're so busy saying, well, she should have done X, Y, or Z, rather than, well, what about the men who do this? Why aren't we, all of us collectively, all women, all men, and it needs men too, standing up and ensuring, particularly in the criminal justice system, we're doing something about these men?
Yeah, well, at least you have two of those men here on this podcast with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there are many millions others out there, but maybe they just don't know and they don't realize how they need to step up. They need to be there and they need to be observant and situationally aware and make sure that they're not even tacitly encouraging their other friends or their coworkers or their buddies to engage in this kind of behavior that really puts women at risk.
My thanks again to Real Crime Profile for having me on as a guest. And please consider following Real Crime Profile to hear more of their episodes. Hey, Prime members, you can listen to Real Crime Profile wherever you get your podcasts or ad-free on Amazon Music. Download the Amazon Music app today.